Put your fingers on your wrist right now. Feel that pulse, that rhythmic beat arriving every second, steady, reliable, the most familiar sensation in your body. You have felt it 10,000 times. You know exactly what it is. Your heart beating, blood arriving, the pump doing its job. Except that is not what you are feeling. The blood itself has not arrived yet. What you are feeling is a wave, a pressure wave, generated by your heart, traveling through your arterial walls at somewhere between 5 and 10 meters per second. The blood, the actual fluid, moves at a tiny fraction of that speed. In your larger arteries, blood flows at roughly half a meter per second. In your capillaries, it slows to millimeters per second. The wave that creates your pulse travels 20 times faster than the blood it is pushing. What arrives at your wrist first, what you feel as the beat, is not the fluid. It is the physics of the fluid, the pressure front, the mechanical wave propagating through elastic tissue. Your heart is not a pump in the way you probably imagine a pump. It is a pressure wave generator. And your vascular system is not a system of pipes through which fluid is pushed. It is a network of elastic tubes specifically engineered to propagate, absorb, and transform pressure waves in ways that keep continuous flow moving to your organs, even though the heart beats in discrete pulses. The engineering inside your chest is so sophisticated, so precisely tuned to the physics of wave mechanics and fluid dynamics, that it took humanity centuries to begin understanding it, and most people never learn any of it. To understand what your heart actually does, you need to start with a problem. The heart contracts once per second, 1 beat per second, and yet blood flows continuously to your brain, your kidneys, your liver, your muscles, not in pulses. Continuously. If you were to measure blood flow in your capillaries, the tiny vessels at the end of the vascular tree, you would find it moving in a nearly steady stream, not surging with each heartbeat, flowing smoothly. How does a pump that fires in discrete pulses produce continuous flow at the delivery end of the system? The answer is in the walls of your arteries, and the name for the mechanism is the Windkessel effect. Windkessel is a German word meaning air chamber. It refers to a device used in old firefighting pumps. Early fire engines had a piston pump, like the heart, that delivered water in pulses. To convert those pulses into a steady stream for the fire hose, engineers added a large air-filled chamber between the pump and the hose. When the piston fired, water rushed into the chamber, compressing the air inside. The compressed air then pushed water out the other side steadily between pulses, smoothing the intermittent input into continuous output. The air chamber was the buffer. It stored energy during the peak of each pulse and released it during the trough. Your aorta is your Windkessel chamber. The aorta, the large artery leaving the heart, and the major elastic arteries branching from it are not rigid pipes. They are elastic vessels made of smooth muscle and elastin fibers, capable of expanding and recoiling with each heartbeat. When the heart contracts during systole and ejects blood into the aortic wall expands, stretching outward to accommodate the surge of blood. This expansion stores the mechanical energy of the heartbeat in the stretched elastic wall, exactly as compressed air stores energy in the Windkessel chamber. When the heart relaxes during diastole, the stretched aortic wall recoils inward, pushing blood forward through the arterial tree. The elastic recoil of the aorta during diastole is what maintains forward blood flow between heartbeats. It is what keeps your organs receiving blood during the half second when your heart is not contracting. The aorta is not just a conduit, it is an active participant in the hydraulics of circulation, a biological pressure reservoir charging and discharging 60 to 80 times per minute, every minute of your life. Now here is where the physics becomes even more interesting. When the heart contracts and ejects blood into the aorta, two things happen simultaneously. The blood moves forward and a pressure wave is launched. This pressure wave, the pulse wave, travels through the arterial tree much faster than the blood itself. The speed at which a pressure wave travels through an elastic tube depends on the stiffness of the tube wall and the density of the fluid inside. In a young, healthy aorta, with elastic walls and normal blood density, the pulse wave velocity is approximately 5 to 7 meters per second. In a stiff, aged, or diseased aorta, the pulse wave velocity increases, sometimes reaching 12 to 15 meters per second or more. This number, pulse wave velocity, is one of the most important and underappreciated measurements in cardiovascular medicine, and we will come back to it because it is directly connected to your risk of dying from a heart attack or stroke. As the pulse wave travels through the arterial tree, it encounters something that happens to every wave when it meets a boundary or a change in medium. Reflection. Every time the pulse wave reaches a branching point in the arterial tree, where one artery divides into two, or where the vessel changes diameter or stiffness, a portion of the wave is reflected backward toward the heart. In a young, healthy cardiovascular system, the reflected waves arrive back at the aorta during diastole, after the heart has relaxed and the aortic valve has closed. The reflected wave adds to the diastolic pressure, which is beneficial. It helps maintain adequate pressure in the coronary arteries, the vessels that supply blood to the heart muscle itself. The timing of wave reflection is tuned in a healthy young vascular system to put the reflected energy where it is most useful. But here is what happens as arteries stiffen with age, or with high blood pressure, or with the accumulation of arterial plaque. When the arterial walls become less elastic, the pulse wave velocity increases. The wave travels faster. This means the reflected waves arrive back at the aorta earlier, during late systole instead of diastole. And when the reflected wave arrives during systole, when the heart is still contracting and ejecting blood, the reflection adds to the systolic pressure instead of the diastolic pressure. This increases the load on the heart during every contraction. The heart has to work harder to eject blood against the elevated systolic pressure, augmented by the early wave reflection. Over years and decades, this increased workload causes the left ventricle to hypertrophy, its walls thickening as the muscle adapts to the chronic pressure overload. A thickened, hypertrophied left ventricle is less efficient, less compliant, and at significantly higher risk of failure. Arterial stiffness, measurable through pulse wave velocity, is one of the most powerful independent predictors of cardiovascular mortality. Not because stiffness itself kills directly, but because of exactly this mechanism: faster waves, earlier reflections, augmented systolic pressure, increased cardiac workload, and eventually, cardiac failure. This is what your blood pressure numbers actually measure. When a doctor takes your blood pressure and reads, for example, 120/80, the 120 is your systolic pressure, the peak pressure, in your arteries during ventricular contraction and pulse wave propagation. The 80 is your diastolic pressure, the minimum pressure in your arteries during ventricular relaxation, maintained by the elastic recoil of the aorta and the Windkessel effect. The difference between them, 40 millimeters of mercury in this example, is called the pulse pressure, and pulse pressure is a proxy for arterial stiffness. As arteries stiffen, the Windkessel effect decreases. The aorta stores less energy during systole and releases less during diastole. Diastolic pressure falls as the elastic buffer weakens. Systolic pressure rises as the heart ejects into a stiffer system, and wave reflections augment peak pressure. The pulse pressure widens. An increasing pulse pressure, especially in older individuals, is a warning sign that the vascular Windkessel is losing its elasticity and the wave mechanics of the cardiovascular system are becoming less efficient. Now consider what the heart is actually doing with every single beat in the context of all of this. The left ventricle, a muscular chamber roughly the size of a fist, generates a pressure of about 120 millimeters of mercury during systole. This pressure is transmitted to the blood in the ventricle and launches a pressure wave into the aorta. The wave propagates through 30,000 kilometers of blood vessels, ranging from the centimeter-wide aorta to the 8-micrometer-wide capillaries. It branches and divides, losing energy to the viscous resistance of the blood and to the elastic deformation of the vessel walls. It reflects at every branching point and diameter change. It interacts with reflected waves coming back from the periphery. All of this complex wave physics unfolds in less than 1 second, 60 to 80 times per minute, every minute, without interruption, for the entire duration of your life. If you live to 80 years old, your heart will have generated approximately 3 billion pressure waves. 3 billion precisely timed hydraulic pulses, each one launching a mechanical wave through the largest and most complex fluid distribution network ever constructed. And the heart does all of this while consuming only 6 watts of power. 6 watts. A small LED light bulb. The human heart moving 5 liters of blood per minute through a network of 30,000 kilometers of vessels, maintaining continuous flow to 100 trillion cells, does so on the power consumption of a nightlight. The efficiency of the system is a consequence of the wave mechanics, because the heart does not have to push every blood cell all the way from the aorta to the capillaries with brute force. It generates a wave. The wave propagates through elastic tissue, doing the mechanical work of pressure transmission. The blood rides the wave. The elastic arteries store and release the energy. The geometry of the vascular tree, its branching pattern, its progressive change in diameter and stiffness from the aorta to the arterioles, is tuned to minimize the energy loss of wave propagation and maintain the pressure gradients needed to drive flow from the large vessels into the tiny capillaries where the actual exchange of oxygen and nutrients occurs. This is why aerobic exercise is so powerfully protective for cardiovascular health at the mechanistic level. Regular aerobic exercise, particularly sustained moderate intensity exercise, stimulates the release of nitric oxide from the endothelial cells lining the arterial walls. Nitric oxide causes smooth muscle relaxation and arterial dilation. Over time, regular aerobic exercise promotes structural changes in the arterial walls that preserve and restore elasticity. It reduces arterial stiffness. It reduces pulse wave velocity. It keeps the Windkessel effect functioning efficiently. It keeps the timing of wave reflections in the diastolic window where they support coronary perfusion rather than augmenting systolic load. Exercise does not just strengthen the heart muscle. It preserves the physics of the entire cardiovascular system. It keeps the wave mechanics tuned to the design specifications that evolution spent hundreds of millions of years optimizing. And here is the thought that should stay with you. Right now, as you listen to this, your heart is contracting. A pressure wave is propagating through your aorta at several meters per second. It is branching into your carotid arteries, traveling toward your brain. It is traveling down your aorta toward your kidneys, your intestines, your legs. Reflected waves are returning from your periphery, arriving back at your aorta, adding their energy to your diastolic pressure, keeping your coronary arteries perfused between beats. Your aortic wall is expanding and recoiling, storing energy during systole, releasing it during diastole, smoothing the pulsatile output of your heart into the continuous flow that your capillaries require. All of this wave physics, this hemodynamics, this precisely tuned mechanical engineering is happening in your chest and your arteries right now and has been happening every second of your life, powered by 6 watts, maintained by the elastic properties of biological tissue, calibrated by 3 billion years of evolutionary refinement. The pulse you feel on your wrist is not just a heartbeat. It is a pressure wave, a mechanical wave traveling through elastic biological tissue, arriving at your fingertips as the physical record of a hydraulic system so precisely engineered that it has sustained conscious human life for hundreds of thousands of years without ever needing to stop for maintenance. That is what a heartbeat actually is. And now you know the physics behind it. Applied biology, pulsing in real time, 60 times a minute, in the vessels you have never thought to question. There is one more layer to this story that most people never reach, and it involves a man who lived 400 years ago and a discovery that changed medicine forever. But that still left the physics of the heartbeat almost entirely unexplained. In 1628, the English physician William Harvey published a short book called Exercitatio Anatomica de Motu Cordis et Sanguinis in Animalibus, which translates roughly as an anatomical exercise on the motion of the heart and blood in animals. Harvey was the first person to demonstrate, through systematic experiment and calculation, that blood circulates continuously around the body rather than being consumed by the tissues, as the prevailing Galenic theory had held for 1,500 years. He calculated that the heart ejects approximately 2 ounces of blood with each beat, and that with 72 beats per minute, it would push more than 8,000 pounds of blood through the body in a single hour, far more than could possibly be manufactured by the liver as Galen had proposed. The blood had to be recycled. It had to circulate. Harvey proved it, and in doing so, he founded modern cardiovascular physiology. But Harvey knew only that blood moved. He did not know how it moved at the physical level. He did not know about the pressure wave. He did not know about the Windkessel effect. He did not know that the elasticity of the arterial walls was as important to circulation as the contractile force of the heart. He did not know that the pulse you feel on your wrist is not blood arriving, but a mechanical wave propagating through tissue. These were questions that would take another 300 years of physics and mathematics and experimental measurement to begin answering. Otto Frank, the German physiologist who developed the Windkessel model of the circulation in the 1890s, was working with equations from fluid mechanics and wave theory that Harvey had no access to. The full quantitative understanding of pulse wave velocity, wave reflection, and their relationship to arterial stiffness and cardiovascular disease developed through the 20th century and is still being refined today. What this history tells you is that the cardiovascular system is not simple. It has been studied intensively for 4 centuries by some of the most brilliant minds in medicine and physics, and we are still discovering new dimensions of its mechanical complexity. The heart is not a solved problem. It is an ongoing area of research, with clinical implications that are becoming clearer every decade. The measurement of arterial stiffness and pulse wave velocity is now used in clinical practice in many countries as a predictor of cardiovascular risk. The understanding of how wave reflection timing changes with age and disease has informed new approaches to antihypertensive therapy. The recognition that different blood pressure medications affect arterial stiffness differently, independently of their effects on mean blood pressure, has changed how cardiologists think about cardiovascular protection. All of this clinical relevance traces back to the physics, to the understanding that your cardiovascular system is not a simple pump and pipe network, but a wave-based fluid distribution system whose function depends on the mechanical properties of the vessel walls as much as on the contractile force of the heart. The elasticity of your arteries is not a passive structural property. It is a functional parameter, as important to cardiovascular health as your heart rate or your blood pressure. And it is a parameter you can influence through the same lifestyle inputs that affect every other aspect of cardiovascular physiology: regular aerobic exercise, blood pressure control, avoidance of smoking, maintenance of metabolic health. Each of these interventions at the mechanistic level preserves the elastic properties of the arterial wall, maintains the efficiency of the Windkessel effect, keeps the pulse wave velocity in the range where wave reflection timing supports rather than undermines cardiac function, and reduces the cumulative mechanical stress on the heart over decades. This is what it means to understand your cardiovascular system from first principles rather than from a simplified model. The pump metaphor is not wrong, but it is incomplete. And the incompleteness matters because what the pump metaphor misses is precisely the physics that makes the cardiovascular system so vulnerable to aging and so responsive to the right interventions. The pump metaphor suggests that as long as the heart is strong, the system works. The wave mechanics perspective reveals that the arterial walls are just as important as the heart, that their stiffness determines the load the heart must overcome with every beat, and that protecting their elasticity over a lifetime is one of the most concrete and actionable things you can do for your long-term cardiovascular health. So the next time you feel your pulse, put your fingers on your wrist and hold them there for a moment. Feel that wave arriving. That is not just a beat. That is a mechanical wave, generated by a 4-chamber pressure pump in your chest, propagating through 30,000 kilometers of elastic tubing, branching and reflecting and smoothing into continuous flow, powered by 6 watts of biological energy, calibrated by 3 billion years of evolution, and arriving at your fingertips as the most familiar sensation in your body. Now, you know what it actually is. The physics of a heartbeat, applied biology, pulsing in real time. Let me give you one final piece of this picture, because it connects the physics of your heartbeat to something you experience every day without knowing its mechanical cause. When you exercise vigorously, your heart rate increases. You know this. You feel it. What you may not know is what happens to the wave mechanics of your circulation during exercise, and why those changes are themselves part of what makes exercise so powerfully protective. During exercise, your muscles need more blood, more oxygen, more glucose, faster removal of carbon dioxide and metabolic waste. The cardiovascular system responds by increasing heart rate and increasing the force of each contraction, raising both cardiac output and blood pressure. But it also responds by dilating the small arteries and arterioles, supplying the exercising muscles, reducing the peripheral resistance that the blood must overcome to flow through those tissues. This dilation is driven by several signals: the local accumulation of metabolic byproducts in the muscle tissue, the release of nitric oxide from endothelial cells stimulated by the increased shear stress of faster blood flow, and signals from the autonomic nervous system coordinating the whole body cardiovascular response to exercise. This peripheral dilation changes the wave reflection dynamics of the entire system. As the small arteries dilate and their resistance drops, they become better impedance matched to the larger arteries feeding them. Less of the pulse wave is reflected at the transition points. The reflection coefficient drops. Less wave energy returns to the central arteries, and the energy that does return arrives with less amplitude. During intense exercise, the augmentation of central pressure by wave reflection can actually decrease, even as heart rate and cardiac output increase dramatically. The heart is working harder, but the load presented to it by wave reflection is paradoxically lower during vigorous exercise than at rest in a young, healthy cardiovascular system. The system is tuned to facilitate the demands of physical exertion in ways that go far beyond simple pump speed increases. And this is one of the reasons why people who exercise regularly develop measurably different vascular properties over time. Regular aerobic exercise chronically increases endothelial nitric oxide production, chronically reduces sympathetic vascular tone, and promotes structural adaptations in the arterial wall that increase its elastic compliance. The exercised cardiovascular system develops larger, more elastic arteries with lower pulse wave velocity, better Windkessel function, and more favorable wave reflection timing. The physics of the heartbeat becomes more efficient. The heart does less work for the same cardiac output. The diastolic perfusion of the coronary arteries improves. The cumulative mechanical stress on the arterial walls decreases. Exercise does not just protect the heart by making it stronger. It protects the entire wave-based fluid distribution system by keeping the elastic properties of the vessel walls in the range where the system's physics work as designed. And now consider the other direction. Consider what happens to someone who is sedentary for decades, whose arteries progressively stiffen with age and with the chronic low-grade inflammation associated with metabolic dysfunction and excess visceral fat. The pulse wave velocity rises. The Windkessel effect weakens. Wave reflections arrive earlier during systole. Central systolic pressure rises. The heart hypertrophies under the increased load. The coronary arteries receive less diastolic perfusion, and the person begins the slow, measurable deterioration of cardiovascular function that most people simply call getting older, as if it were inevitable, as if the physics of the situation could not have been influenced by decades of earlier choices. It can be influenced, not completely, not forever, not without limits. Aging does stiffen arteries regardless of lifestyle, and genetic factors shape the baseline trajectory. But the magnitude of the stiffening, the rate at which pulse wave velocity rises, the degree to which wave reflection timing shifts from diastolic to systolic augmentation is profoundly influenced by the inputs the vascular system receives over a lifetime. Exercise, blood pressure control, metabolic health, avoidance of smoking, reduction of chronic inflammation, all of these intervene directly in the molecular and mechanical processes that determine arterial wall elasticity. They keep the physics working. They preserve the wave mechanics that the cardiovascular system depends on to distribute blood efficiently, protect the heart from excessive mechanical load, and maintain the perfusion of every organ in the body. This is what your cardiovascular system is. Not just a pump, not just a network of pipes. A precision-engineered wave-based pressure distribution system whose function depends on the elastic properties of its components, whose efficiency is maintained by the physical health of the vessel walls, and whose longevity is determined as much by the biology of arterial tissue as by the biology of the heart itself. 3 billion years of evolution built this system. It is running in your chest right now. And every time you put your fingers on your wrist and feel that pulse arrive, you are feeling the output of the most sophisticated fluid dynamic system ever constructed, delivering the mechanical proof of its own operation 60 times per minute to your fingertips. That is a heartbeat. That is applied biology, in the most literal and physical sense, pulsing right now in the vessels you have carried your entire life without ever fully knowing what they were doing. One last thought. Because there is something philosophically significant about what we have covered today that goes beyond the cardiovascular system itself. Most people go through their entire lives with a model of their own body that is decades or centuries out of date. The pump and pipe model of the heart and circulation was adequate for understanding that blood moves and that the heart moves it. It was the model that Harvey gave us in 1628, and for the purpose of that era, it was revolutionary. But the wave mechanics model, the Windkessel model, the pulse wave velocity model, the understanding of wave reflection, and arterial impedance, these are 20th and 21st century frameworks. They are what the physics of the cardiovascular system actually requires to be fully understood, and they are almost entirely absent from public understanding of how the heart works. This gap matters, not because everyone needs to understand the mathematics of wave propagation in elastic tubes, but because the simplified model creates a simplified picture of what cardiovascular health means and what threatens it. If the heart is just a pump and the arteries are just pipes, then heart disease is a problem of pump failure and pipe blockage. And that is partly true, but it misses the critical importance of arterial elasticity, of pulse wave velocity, of wave reflection timing, of the Windkessel effect, of all the wave mechanics that determine how efficiently the heart's output is distributed and how much mechanical stress the heart itself must absorb with every beat. It misses the physics, and missing the physics means missing some of the most important levers for cardiovascular protection. The more complete model, the wave mechanics model, tells you that your arteries are not passive pipes. They are active participants in your cardiovascular function, storing and releasing energy with every heartbeat, shaping the pressure waves that supply your organs, determining the load your heart must overcome 60 times per minute. And it tells you that the health of those arterial walls, their elasticity, their compliance, their resistance to stiffening is not a secondary consideration after heart strength and cholesterol levels. It is central. It is the physics on which everything else depends. That is the lesson from the pressure wave. That is what a heartbeat teaches you when you look at it from the inside. Not just that the heart beats, but how the beating works, and why the walls of the vessels through which the wave travels are as important to your life as the muscle that generates it. Applied biology in the physics of a pulse, arriving at your fingertips right now.